Hello, everyone, and very happy New Year. This is our first event for this year. As you know, Indic Forum is a nonprofit, and every month we conduct at least one event where we bring an author and intellectual who can speak on a particular topic related to Dharma, and we give such authors a platform and also an opportunity for viewers to interact with author, ask them questions directly. Um, so this is our first event for the year, and today we have with us uh, Sri Nitin Sridhar. He's a practicing Hindu author, speaker, and the director of Indica Center for Moksha Studies. Previously, it was called Advaita Academy, and he's dedicated to the decimation of Advaita Vedanta. He has authored 6 books on various aspects of Hindu culture and practice. His first book, Musings on Hinduism, provided an overview of various aspects of Hindu philosophy and Hindu society. Then his second book, the Samanya Dharma, talked about general tenets of ethics as available in Hindu texts. His latest book is Ishopanishad, an English commentary, is an English translation of commentary on one of the most prominent Upanishadic texts. However, his most widely read book is Menstruation Across Cultures, a Historical Perspective, which examines the mensuration notions and practices prevalent in different cultures around the world. And his upcoming book is a commentary on opening verses of Manusmriti. Uh, he teaches courses on Hinduism for Indica courses and regularly contributes articles and delivers lectures on religion, spirituality, culture at various platforms. He had also served as an editor of India Facts, a portal on Indian history and culture. You can follow him on Twitter on NKGrok. That's his Twitter handle. Uh, Having said that, thank you, Nitin Sridharji, for making time for this lecture. It's a very interesting book, and we have a very good audience today. So please go ahead. The stage is all yours. And those who want to ask questions, please feel to ask those questions in the Zoom chat session, and either the author or I can, take them up. It's up to the author whether they want to answer it in the end or while people ask it. But feel free to type your questions in the chat. Yeah, please go ahead, Nitinji.
Uh, Thank you, Aksharji, and thank you, Nehaji, for inviting me. I also see familiar names. I see Rajiv ji also in the audience. Very nice to see him here. Uh, so this will be a book presentation on menstruation across cultures. Let me begin with a prayer first. Vakratunda Mahakaya Koti Surya Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada Om Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhadrakali Kapalini Durga Kshama Shiva Dhatri Swaha Sadha Namostute Bharati Karunapatram Bharati Padabhushanam Bharati Padamarudam Bharati Tirthamashre Vidya Vinaya Sampannam Vitaragam Vivekinam Vande Vedanta Tattvagam Vidushekara Bharatim सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्परां श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम् Again, very glad to be here on today's session. Let me share my screen. Just give me a second. Is the full screen
Yes.
visible now? Okay,
Yes.
okay. So the title of my book is Menstruation Across Cultures, a Historical Perspective. And there is a superscript, as you can see in the image, the Sabarimala confusion. So the superscript tells about kind of the genesis of the book, the story about how or why the book was written. whereas the title itself tells about the content of the book, the theme of the book, the topic of the book. As it is a book presentation, I thought instead of presenting about the topic of menstruation per se, I would rather speak about the book, what made me to take up this book, to whom is the book written, and give an overview of the content of the book. Uh, so let me begin with the story of the book, the genesis of the book. So many of you who are following the closely the civilization issues that is uh, happening in India over the last 15-20 years, you're well aware about the Sabarimala temple entry issue. Uh, I think back in around 2014, 2015, the Sabarimala Ayyappa Swami temple issue was uh, in huge news everywhere. Uh, Basically, the controversy was regarding the entry of women into the temple. More precisely, entry of women between menarche and menopause. So there is a prohibition in that particular temple at Sabarimala, Ayyappa Swami temple, where young girls before their menarche, or uh, more adult women after their menopause, they are allowed inside the temple, but those in their childbearing age, that is between menarche and menopause, those women are not allowed. So that has been a practice for a very long time in the temple. So regarding this practice, there has been many court cases, and that those cases had come into picture, and there was a lot of controversy, and there was also a judgment saying that there were a lot of activists who created a narrative about how this prohibition is a act against women, it's a misogynistic tendency, it's a practice rooted in superstition, in outdated ideas, and there was a whole narrative build up about how this this prohibition is an example of negative attitudes in Hindu dharma as a whole towards women. So it is at this juncture the first, perhaps, the first, what should I say, interest took in me to study this subject. So before this controversy, of course, Sabarimala is a famous temple, but all the details about these practices, even I was not aware. So when this controversy erupted, that in 2014 and 2015, I first, out of curiosity, I studied the issue first, and it was very clear. Uh, the narrative in the media and the mainstream was that the cause behind the temple prohibition was, one of the causes was mainly the menstruation of women. So using this, the narrative was created that Hinduism as a whole uh, degrades women by looking down upon menstruation. So they connected the Sabarimala prohibition with the menstruation and created a narrative. So at the very outside, as I started investigating, I realized that Sabarimala prohibition has no direct connection to menstruation per se. So the prohibition has to do with the nature of the deity. So see, the Sanskrit term for temple is a devalaya. It is a abode of the deity. So there is a deity there. It is not a stone. There is a prana pratishtapana that happens. So the tattva and the shakti of the deity resides there. So based on the nature of the deity, then the practices of the temple are also designed, because the practices of the temple are they serve the purpose of retaining that tattva, retaining that shakti of the deity, devata, so that we all can access, the devotees can access it and get benefit out of it, get the anugraha of the devata. So the devata, there is a Naishtika Brahmachari, and as a Naishtika Brahmachari, there are certain rules. As per those rules, the certain practices has evolved. So this has nothing, no direct connection to menstruation itself, as the media was doing. But then, I realized there is a whole cleverly created discourse of using this as a weapon, this practice as a weapon, to beat down the entire Hindu civilization practice, Hindu cultural practice, Hindu attitudes towards menstruation. So you will see a lot of documentaries on YouTube and everywhere saying how these traditional practices regarding menstruation, they are all superstition, how they are outdated, how they are unscientific, how they are without basis, how they are irrational. So you will see all this narrative that was built together. So then, of course, then I realized that perhaps uh, let me study then about the menstruation itself. So before that time, I had also no idea about this. I never tried to inquire into this subject matter, and my own journey, so to speak, has been um, intellectually speaking. For a time, I was when I was in high school, I was introduced to Western philosophy, the Socrates, etc. So that led to a short period of atheism before I made a rediscovery, a philosophical rediscovery into Hindu culture, history, philosophy, darshana, and sadhana, the adhyatma, etc. So kind of a ghar wapsi happened when I was in college, and so I was always curious. I've been always seeking truth and knowledge as such. So out of this curiosity, I started studying. Uh, I started asking, trying to find answer to the question: what does Hinduism, what does Hindu Dharma really teach about menstruation? So the first question, obviously, it was not an easy and easy. There were no easy answers. Yes, answers are definitely present. That I realized later, but answers were not handy. And I'm sure, if there are any women in the audience, and I've been speaking to a lot of women over the last 5 years since the book was published, 6 years, and many women have recounted how when they were young they had these questions, but there were no easily available answers. So at that time, when I started to ask this question, try to find the answer to this question, then my first job was to collect the available textual sources, because on all these matters of religious matters, including our attitudes, our religious attitudes to menstruation, we have to, there are two aspects to it. One is the practice on the ground, the other is the textual aspect, the shastra pramana, because the shastra pramana informs the practice and the practice also informs the shastras. So it happens two ways. Shastras sometimes provide guidelines about adrishta, the invisible results which are not available from any other sources, and those guidelines shape our life. Sometimes our activity, our mores, our ethos, our learnings, they also become compiled into shastras. So both are important. And currently, the fact that we are living in a post-colonial society and our society is still colonized, our practice or our kind of contemporary attitudes cannot be a guide to understand our true practices, our true teachings of Hindu Dharma. So this, the most authentic source then is the textual source. So I began to collect these textual sources from various range of wherever, whatever I could lay my hands on. So I collected sources from Vedas to Smritis to Ayurvedic texts to yoga to tantric texts, and also some anthropological studies done by anthropologists on various communities in India. So what I discovered was very surprising, very shocking. because what I discovered was that there is a big mismatch between how the contemporary discourse posits Hindu views of menstruation. The contemporary discourse posits Hinduism as, or Hindu Dharma as, mistreating women owing to menstruation, seeing women as, uh, it posits Hindu Dharma as degrading women, degrading the respect of women, or uh, it posits Hinduism as perceiving women as inferior owing to menstruation. However, the teachings of the Hindu Shastras are completely different. So this was a very big discovery, and I wanted to share it with others. So I authored a series of 6 articles titled Hindu Views of Menstruation, which was published in India Facts, which I had then joined as an editor. So that series of essays called Hindu Views of Menstruation, they can be considered as the first concrete draft of the book, or concrete draft which later became expanded into a book. Uh, just give me a second. After reading one of these essays, Srimati Renukal Vermaji of Vitasta Publication, she approached me with with a request to expand my work into a book. This happened towards the end of 2016, and then at that time I was initially hesitant because I thought everything I had read, everything I wanted to say, I have already shared as a essays. I had no plans for writing another book or expanding it. But still, I thought it is a good challenge. Let me see what to do. So I accepted the offer. And then I tried to read randomly this here and that for some time. And as I was reading and reflecting further, I realized that the work is indeed not complete unless the important element that was missing is a comparative study. So it is one thing to present Hindu views of menstruation, but to actually make sense of it, then it is more meaningful to compare it. They will do a comparative study to understand what are the attitudes and practices towards menstruation prevalent in different cultures across the world, in different religions, different tribal communities, ancient civilizations, and as well as do a comparison between the Hindu perspectives, and as well as the our contemporary modern understanding, or a contemporary views or opinions rooted in scientism and modernity. So this led me to then dedicate another 2 years to researching, to reading, to researching, understanding how the different cultures, civilizations, they understood, they approached menstruation from whatever resources I could lay my hands on, and then writing them into a book. So that is how this book was born and was published in December 2018. And uh, so this is the story behind the book. Uh, but of course, the question still remains that why this book? You already heard a bit about the story, but let me take up a bit more. I mentioned about the negative attitudes about Hinduism, but before going there, uh, what are the some of the common menstruation related practices in Hindu society? Nowadays, especially in urban India, um, you hardly get to see all of these practices. Only some of them perhaps you will be able to see, but otherwise, uh, even in I think 50, 60 years back or 100 years back, these practices were widely prevalent across Hindu society. But even now it is there. Some of them are even there in the urban areas. For example, most women don't go to temples. when they are having their periods. Usually they don't participate in rituals and puja and such things. So this is one of the most common practice that is still prevalent today, even though many do violate it because there is no enforcement per se. These are all guidelines that have been passed on in our own families. And I'll take the questions towards the end, so that will be good, so that I can speak without interruption. So many of these practices, so if you read through some of the Hindu texts and as well as the anthropological studies, you'll see what are the some of the important menstruation related practices in Hindu texts or Hindu dharma. One is, of course, no sexual intercourse during the time of the periods, and no running, exercises, kitchen and household activities. So anything that is physically straining, and especially cooking and other activities. We know this that in a pre-colonial society, in many villages, there used to be designated spots with huts and everywhere everything, or sometimes within the house itself, just outside of the main building, designated spots were places were created where the women of that family, during their periods, they would segregate themselves from the rest of the family. During that time, they did not do any household activity. They did not look after the children or cook at home or do anything. They spent their time separately, and all the household responsibilities were taken by some other person of the family. And some other things were such as no bathing, no combing, application of prohibition of bathing, combing, application of colorium, kajal, that is, and body anointment, oil massage, self-adorning activities. See, all these are mentioned in Dharma Shastra texts. They are mentioned in Ayurvedic texts. They are mentioned in different places. So, uh, restrictions related to food. The Ayurvedic text specifically mention about uh, women should take very light food. They should not eat much. They should eat very less food, and the food should be such that it is easily digestible food. They should avoid meat, etc. At least during those periods, during the time of the 3 days of the periods, and so many other things. And restrictions related to performance of religious and spiritual activities, such as visiting Hindu temples. I already mentioned this, the prohibitions. The Ayurvedic text also speaks about how the women should try to maintain mental calm as much as possible, and mental uh, soberness, calmness during the periods, neither getting too happy nor too sad, such things. And then other practices are at a more cultural level. We see there is a great celebration of at the onset of menstruation. So even today, you will see in Tamil Nadu, etc. There is a big marriage like functions happens when the daughter starts her periods. Even in Karnataka and all, to some extent, these practices happen, and also in the Andhra and Telangana area. But if you look into the anthropological studies and other research, even 50 years or 100 years back or 150 years back, all these similar practices were prevalent across the length and breadth of India, from the north to southern tip, from the east to western tip. So this was a wide practices. Everybody used to celebrate the onset of menstruation for the women. And even today, you will see that worshipping and celebrating festivals of our goddesses on the Devis undergoing menstruation. So we have menstruating deities. So for the most important example is Kamakhya in Assam, where every year the Kamakhya Devi, the temple is shut for 4 days when she undergoes menstruation, and the water spring there, it becomes red in color, Similarly, we have in Odisha we have there is a Raja Parba where the Bhumi is said to undergo menstruation. Harachandika is worshipped also. There are many other, even in South, in Tamil Nadu, we have similar festivals. In Kerala, there is a, famous temple of Devi, where every few months once there will be red spots on the sari that she wears, and when that is visible, she will be undergoing her menstruation. So there are a lot of such views that celebrate menstruation. So these are some of the views and practices related to menstruation prevalent in Hindu society and mentioned, enunciated in Hindu texts, be it Dharmashastra texts like Vedas, Smritis, Puranas, etc., or the Ayurvedic texts such as Sushruta Samhita and etc. Now, what is the sorry? What is the typical attitude? What is the typical attitude of a Hindu towards these practices? So there are three columns here. Uh, the one set is about observant Hindu households. Now, with every passing day, the observant Hindu households are reducing. I mean, those who who follow our traditions. The thing is, they many of them, not all of them, of course. There are also many who practice our Hindu dharma in an enlightened way. That is, they practice it with understanding, with full shraddha and jnana both. But however, the fact is, from my interaction with many lot of people from different segments, among the observant Hindu households, you will see that many of the traditional practices that has been transmitted from generation to generation. These the menstruation related practices that our text mentions, all them, they practice many of them faithfully. Like, don't go to temple, don't go to our puja, don't do puja inside the house during the periods, all those things, or don't go to kitchen also in some places. But they do it quite mechanically. They may themselves not be aware. Many of in my interaction with a lot of women, the one of the complaint they said was, in their generation when they were young and they asked questions why this should be done in this way, the answers ranged from shutting their mouth, just do what I say, to at best saying this is how we have been taught, this is how my mother used also did, my grandmother also did, you also simply do it. So following faithfully, following mechanically, and usually not open to questions. Of course, that approach is no longer works today, because that approach means more and more people giving up the practice. That has what has happened. So we have all this modern, educated, urbanized Hindu women, or Hindus in general, who reject our practices, traditional practices. They faithfully reject them. Just as the observant Hindu household faithfully accept them, practice them, the modernized, educated Hindus faithfully reject them without even examining whether it is correct, wrong, whether there is merit, whether there is some benefit. They faithfully reject, and they also reject mechanically, and they do not even care for the answer. So the reason why they faithfully reject and faithfully and do it mechanically is that they don't care for the answer itself. They are happy in their own little wells, so they don't care. And then there are those inimical to dharma. They use these attitudes to further, you know use it as a platform to attack Hindu dharma. So they designate our menstruation related practices as misogynistic. They designate them as superstition. They create misinformation, create negative discourse out of all this. However, somehow in all these things, a serious and genuine inquiry regarding the question why of the related to menstruation practices are missing. So the young girls, when they attain puberty, they all have this genuine question somehow at one time, but over a period of time that the question is stifled, that turns into either mechanical practice or mechanical rejection, or developing a genuine indifference or genuine hostility towards Hindu Dharma itself. So the question why unfortunately remains unanswered. So it was with this in mind that this book was written to answer the question why. Why these practices are there, why our ancestors have been practicing it and transmitted it, why our shastras tell about it, what could be the different rationale behind it, how they are beneficial. So all these are discussed in my book, and much more have been also discussed, of course. So the next question is, of course, to whom is the book written? One word answer is that it's written for everyone. Men, women, children, everyone. It is written to the young girl who has just attained puberty and is confused and trying to make sense of the bodily changes, behavioral changes, making sense of it in a socio-cultural, religious context of the implications of those things. It is written, the book is written for the mothers who want to impart authentic but also meaningful knowledge about menstruation and menstruation related practices to their children, to their daughters. The book is for all adult women who were unable to find proper answers to these questions when they were young, and also to the fathers, the husbands, and other men folk who want to develop more sensitive, meaningful, and holistic understanding of a phenomenon that the women folk in their family go through for most part of their lives. The book is also the book is written in a semi-academic format so that it can appeal to both the academics, the young scholars, as well as the any other curious audience who may not have an academic background. So the academics and young scholars who want to do more research on menstruation, on women's health, on religious, cultural, and anthropological underpinnings related to menstruation, this book is definitely for them. And for any other curious audience, anybody who wants to have a more meaningful, more wholesome understanding of the topic, they can get a copy and read the book. Just to give a brief synopsis, the central focus of the book is, of course, the examination of the Hindu views of menstruation. Towards this end, I examine both primary and secondary sources, and apart from the central focus of focusing on Hindu views, the book also does an in-depth review of menstruation practices and notions prevalent in other ancient civilizations, Abrahamic religions, etc., and a comparative study of those with the Hindu perspectives. The world cultures covered in the book include other Indic traditions such as, apart from Hinduism, other traditions such as Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and when it comes to Buddhism, the book does not limit itself to the whatever little bit of Buddhist practices prevalent in India. Rather, the major focus is on the Tibetan Buddhism, the way the Buddhism is present in Southeast Asia and China, especially. So those practices are also examined. Ancient civilizations such as Greek civilization, Roman civilization, the Mesopotamian civilization, and Egyptian civilization, they are all examine in quite a detail. The Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they're also studied in some detail. Two themes, when you read through the book, two themes that, you know, it comes out on its own. As you read through the book, the two themes strikes you again and again. These themes are the question of impurity and the question of sacrality. And we see that often they are both associated with menstruation. And the most interesting discovery that you will make as you read the book is that while in general, impurity and sacrality means sacredness, while in general they are considered as opposed to each other, in the context of menstruation, as you read through the book, you'll realize that these two are often two sides of the same coin. So they, and this is especially so regarding the polytheistic traditions, regarding not just Hindu dharma, but also other pre-Christian polytheistic traditions such as Greek, Roman, Mesopotamian, Egyptian. You see that both impurity and sacrality associated with menstruation are acting as two sides of the same coin, not in opposition, but as complementing each other to provide a comprehensive worldview. On the other hand, you also examine that this notion of impurity with associated with menstruation is also present in Abrahamic religions, but there is a great difference. The Abrahamic narrative changes the notion of ritual impurity into a notion of sinfulness. And especially in Christianity and Islam, you don't see any kind of sacrality attached to it. So there is a desacralization. At least in Judaism, in some traditions such as Kabbalah and some other spiritual traditions of Judaism, you see a sacrality attached to even menstruation. So, and of course, the book also has a comparative study of menstrual notions prevalent in modernity versus classical Hinduism. It is more of a brief critique of modernity or brief critique of modern views regarding menstruation. So these are the chapters of the book. The foreword is by Srimati Sumedha Verma Oja. She is a renowned author of books such as Urnabi. And then there is a preface and introduction by authored by me. And then we have the individual chapters. The first chapter is Hindu views of menstruation. Then comes menstrual notions in other Indic traditions. Then there is menstruation notions in Abrahamic religions, menstruation notions in ancient Western civilization, the Greek, Rome, etc. Menstruation notions among indigenous communities across the world. I examined the tribal communities in South America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, etc. And then the final chapter is menstruation attitude, Hinduism versus modernity. There is conclusion, there is appendix and references. I think I have a little bit more time. So I just want to quickly give a more detailed view of the contents of the book. Sorry about that. So in the first chapter on Hindu views of menstruation, the book examines the connection between moon and menstruation in Hindu texts. And it examines a very interesting, very beautiful story about Indra, which is present in the Veda itself. In the Yajurveda, you'll find the story. And the similar story is reiterated in other texts such as Bhagavata Purana, etc. This story is actually is rich in hermeneutics principles, It is the source story from which all Hindu perspectives, all Hindu views, Hindu attitudes can be directly or indirectly derived from. The story is the source story, the core story, which informs Hindu understanding of menstruation. So, what are these principles? They are menstruation as ashaucha, menstruation as tapas or austerity, menstruation as self purification method, menstruation as a period of rest, menstruation as a sacred celebration. And under this sacred celebration, I include large sections about this menarche rituals that are done in different parts of the country. A large section about the deities of menstruation in Hindu Dharma, the festivals about related to menstruation. Then there is a section in yogic and Ayurvedic perspectives of menstruation. Certain Ayurvedic studies have been quoted, which shows the how the menstruation restrictions, the menstruation lifestyle suggested in Dharma text and in suggested in Ayurvedic text, when practiced, they are beneficial to the health of the women. And then finally, a summary of the menstrual restrictions that the first slide I showed. There is a detailed examination of those restrictions. What are the rationale behind them? What are the medical reasons? What are the dharmic reasons? What are the drishta, that is this worldly reason, and adrishta, the invisible otherworldly reason, so to speak. That to just clarify, the term ashaucha, usually shaucha means purity, ashaucha is translated as impurity. But here, the impurity means a ritualistic impurity. The ashaucha has a notion of incompetence also associated with it, something similar to the Greek notion of miasma. It is not a notion of sinfulness, it is not a moral judgment. So the term also ashaucha, what is happening today is, uh, today when we speak in English as impurity, the term English term impurity has a lot of negative baggage. The reason there is a lot of negative baggage is English is a language of the Western civilization, and Western civilization is informed by Christianity or Greco-Christian views. So in the Greco-Christian views, especially in the Christianity, menstruation is associated with sinfulness. They use the term impurity, but they mean sinfulness, right? Therefore, the word or the notion of impurity itself is very negative. But in the Hindu textual tradition or Hindu practices, ashacha is not a negative term, especially in context of menstruation. Is not a negative term. It is merely a explanation about the ritualistic state of a person, the spiritual state of a person, or a yogic state of a person, which makes him ineligible for certain actions, or which makes certain actions ineligible to be unsuitable to be performed by a person. So that is the full understanding of shaucha ashaucha. Shaucha is connected to competence, ashaucha connected to ineligibility. Again, for a detailed understanding, you have to read the book. So then in the second chapter, I deal with Buddhism, Jainism. Among the Jainism, both Digambara view, Shvetambara view are taken into account. And then there is Sikhism, chapter on Sikhism. And there's a comparison with Hindu tradition. The interesting thing about Sikhism is that uh, I think perhaps because of the way the Sikhism was, the genesis of the Sikh religion happened between Hindu Dharma as an anchor, but also a largely Islamic society and all. Their view has a lot of similarity with the Abrahamic view. They don't subscribe to the notions of ritual, impurity, etc. But a deeper study also show that there is an anchorage in the dharmic view also. So there is a kind of a giving up of certain things, trying to preserve certain other aspects. So kind of apad dharma, emergency conditions. that is visible even in the Sikh view of menstruation. And then in the chapter 3, so the chapter 1 was on Hinduism, chapter 2 was other Indic traditions. The chapter, and as I mentioned, when it comes to Buddhism, uh, there is a detailed study about Tibetan Buddhist practices, Chinese Buddhist practices, their beliefs, notions, their understanding related to menstruation. So it is a very interesting read. Similarly, what is very interesting read is the menstruation notions prevalent in Abrahamic religions, be it Judaism, Christianity, Islam. There's a very detailed study in the book. That is why I said it's a semi-academic book. So in Judaism, for example, there is a whole section, two sections examining the practice of nidha. So nidha refers to the bleeding that women undergo, including the menstrual bleeding. So it examines, it quotes a lot of scholars, examines the meaning of the nidha, the sexual abstinence and ritual impurity, and the framing of nidha in the rabbinic tradition in the context of menstruation. And at the end of the period of nidha, there is a purification, and all those things, and how this whole menstruation then becomes associated with the Eve's sin in Judaism, and also carries over to Christianity and Islam also. So the basic notion of sinfulness, where it comes, is that you're all aware of the famous story of the Adam and Eve, right? So the Eve, the Adam and Eve both eat the forbidden apple, and then therefore the God punishes them by excluding them, banishing them from the Garden of Eden. And the person who instigated Adam to eat the apple was the Eve. So they believe that Eve, the progenitor of all the women, human women, because of her sin, she did evil by instigating Adam also. So she committed great evil. So as a punishment to that, all women suffer from menstruation as a punishment to women. This is the source story of the Abrahamic worldview. Therefore, they say that whenever every month the women have periods, they enter a short period of sinfulness. They partake in that original sinfulness, the original sin of the Eve, right? Now, so I mentioned, let us contrast this story with the story of Indra I mentioned. I did not elaborate on the story, but the Vedic story, which is the core of Vedic worldview on menstruation. There, the story is about the Indra who finds out that Twastra, who was a Brahmana and who was supposed to do yagyas and dedicate it to the Devatas, he was secretly giving a portion of the yagya to the Asuras. Now, this means the Asura becomes strong and they will cause chaos. So, obviously, it becomes Indra's duty. So, he goes and slays this Twastra. So, I think, if I remember correctly, it is not the Twastra, but Twastra's son who was doing it. I might have mixed up the story a bit. But, anyways, because of this slaying of a Brahmana, Indra also picks up a Papa Karma called Brahmahatya, Hatya of a Brahmana is Brahmahatya. And in our tradition, Brahmahatya is one of the most severe Papa Karma. So now we can call it a severe sin. But in our case, the sin is not a Christian sin. In our case, it simply means karmic demerit, the Papa. So now Indra tried a lot to get rid of this Papam, this Brahmahatya dosha, but he failed. Finally, he visited Bhumi, requested her to take one third of that papam. He visited the trees and requested them to take one third of the papam. And then he visited women and requested them to take one third of the papam. In return, he gave boons to each one of them. So, when the Bhumi took the one third of the papam manifested as fissures, tectonic plates and fissures on the earth. The boon the earth received was that even though due to human actions, humans will dig up the earth and do all those things, even then, with passing time, the Bhumi has a self-healing property. She can return to her natural glory, natural abundance. To the trees, the papam, when they took upon them, it manifested as a tree sap. The boon they got in turn was that even if their branches are cut, they will not die, they will be able to regrow. And in the case of women, the Vedic story says that one third papam of Indra, the Brahmahatya papam, it manifests as periods, the menstruation, the bleeding. In turn, the women were given the blessing that they can enjoy, they can have a very enjoyable, blissful experience of sexual intercourse until pregnancy. Now, the very interesting thing about this story is what is the nature of papa karma that one third is going to different people. First of all, it is not something that, unlike the story of Eve, Adam and Eve, it is not the women have performed some papa karma. No, it is the Indra who for the Loka Kalyana did the Brahmahatya. So, but the key here is the term Brahmahatya. What is Brahma? Brahma is a creator, right? Brahma is also Brahmana, but Brahma is also the creatrix force. So, Brahmahatya is basically extinguishing of the seed that has potential to give birth to life. So, what is being referred to here is the biological fact that what is actually periods to? It's basically when the women's cycle, when the women is ready to conceive, but where there is no conception, then the seed and everything, the whatever the body was prepared, it goes out as the monthly bleeding. So there was failure of conception, failure of the potential of the egg to manifest a human being, that was wasted. So the Vedic story is indirectly indicating that this biological action, this aspect, gives rise to certain papam because of the kind of unintentional hatya of that potential to manifest child, jivatma was there, was prevented, So as a result, this whole Rajaswala Paricharya, the Rajo Dharma, the whole 3-day period itself acts as a purifying mechanism which frees women from that papa karma. And you see from the Dharma Shastra that the menstruation is considered as the most purifying activity for women. It frees her from the papa karma committed by the mind, papa karma committed by their actions. So it is considered as a great boon to women in the Dharma Shastra. So see, there is a how it is completely two irreconcilable narrative between the state of sinfulness derived in the Abrahamic traditions from Adam and Eve story, but the notion of menstruation being associated with a ritual impurity, yes, but being also a purificatory process at the same time, it is two completely different narrative. So when we speak about ashaucha, it is ritual impurity about the state of a woman who is in a heightened condition of rajoguna. There is rajoguna at the manomaya kosha, there is rajas at the pranamaya kosha, and there is also the flow of blood, raja, and the physical level. Okay. Anyway, so the Judaistic chapter examines all of them, and there is also examination of a rabbinic architecture of women's body. This they compare women's body to a house, and there's a very interesting graphic discussion. You should definitely read it. And the final section is Sechina, moon, and menstruation. Sechina is a goddess who's connected to menstruation in Judaism. So Judaism, at least in the spiritual tradition, is the only exception among the Abrahamic religions which has a sacred element associated with menstruation. But Christianity, Islam, and etc. don't have any sacred element per se, but rather in Christianity, the notions of menstruation, they had early Christianity had medieval Christianity had lot of they thought of medical dangers of menstruation. They had lot of very negative views. They kind of consider menstruation as also sign of idolatry, and they use it to other the Jews, oppress the Jews. The menstruation was one of the important reasons while for the witchcraft persecution of women for in the name of witchcraft, the witch burning that happened in the medieval Europe. A few million died, and one of the reasons for this was their fear of menstruating blood, and its association in their mind with witchcraft. Similarly, in Islam, menstruation is seen somewhat positive in the context of coming of age, but of course, there is also their own narrative related to fall of Eve, Adam and Eve story, and there is also an interesting connection between menstruation and henna applying and jinns. Now they believe in spirit entities called jinns, and see, all are very interesting discussions there. And of course there's a and the last section in this chapter is a comparison of all these uh, Abrahamic religious views on menstruation with Hindu view. And then the fourth chapter is, I think it's already 1 hour. I'll just try to finish it another 5 minutes at 10 minutes. In the fourth chapter deals with the Greek, Roman, etc. In the Greek civilization section, there is, of course, a section on general attitudes to menstruation, followed by how they also consider menstruation and moon as connected. There is an interesting discussion about how some of their scholars perceived menstruation and animal sacrifice, uh, like how in the certain animal sacrifices, in the main sacrifice portions, the women were excluded, where the bloodletting etc. were there. But on the other hand, women themselves used to undergo bleeding month by month after month, which was sometimes compared in some discussions with animal sacrifice. And there is also a section on Greek medicine and medical views on menstruation. Under Roman civilization, also similarly, the notion of menstruation and impurity, there the miasma is examined. Both in Greek and Roman, we examine this. And the notion of menstruation and its association with magical powers, and goddess Diana, who is associated with menstruation. Under the Greek also we examine the goddess Artemis, who is associated with menstruation and her practices. Just like we have Durga, Kamakhya, Gauri, Lajja Gauri, and others associated with menstruation. In the Greek, there is Artemis, and the Romans they have Diana. They are associated with menstruation, the Devatas. And again, the Roman physicians, the medical views of menstruation. In the Mesopotamian civilization, no, there is notion of menstruation as illness, and it immediately recalled to me the mind how in our own in Indian society, especially in colloquial language, we speak of menstruation as some form of illness, rather than, and we don't really consider as illness, but rather in colloquial we use that. In Mesopotamia, there is a civilization also examines menstrual bleeding as a source of impurity, their notion of impurity, medical use of female body substances, and also their twin deities of Inanna and Ishtar, which are associated with menstruation. Uh, Egyptian civilization has lot of very interesting notions which are parallels to Hindu Dharma. The book examines their conception of purity, menstruation, and purification, and they designate menstruation as a category called bivit. I'm not sure the the pronunciation is correct, but in English they write it as BWT, which is both a designation to disorder as well as interdiction against it. And these bivets, the list of bivets, don't do this should not be done, these people should be excluded from this. They are very similar to our Nisheda Vakyas in our Vedas and Smritis. In Nisheda Vakyas also, sometimes what is prohibited is adharma. Some other times what is prohibited is simply something which is incompatible, something uh, which is ineligible or incompatible to a certain situation. Similar notions of bivet is there. They also have a notion called mat, which is similar to our notion of vrita or dharma. They also did secluded and segregated women. So there is also a lot of deities, Hathor and other deities of Egyptian civilization, which were connected to menstruation. And then again, there is a section which does a comparison of all these ancient Western civilizations with Hindu Dharma. And then quickly, the fifth chapter is about other indigenous communities. Uh, I do a analysis quickly under two headings: association with impurity, association with sacredness. So I examined briefly various communities across the world, the tribal communities, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, etc., with regard to this impurity and sacredness. The last chapter is menstruation attitude, Hinduism versus modernity, wherein basically a critique of modernity, that our contemporary views, uh, rooted in so-called scientific temper, basically desacralizes the practices, basically reduces all cultural knowledge into mere superstition, thereby derooting young women, thereby preventing young women from having a holistic experience of menstruation, and instead developing a rather negative attitude towards menstruation. More details in the book. We don't have time to go more. Uh, just a brief praise for the book. Sri Bibek Debroy, who just recently passed away. He was the renowned economist and translator of Mahabharata and other Hindu texts, and also chief economic advisor to Prime Minister. He had reviewed this book for Sunday Guardian, and in his review he writes, "This is an amazing book on an unlikely topic." Amish Tripathi was one of the early readers of the book. He gave an endorsement note. He mentioned how the book clears certain modern day misconceptions, and the topic was dealt with the maturity and nuance. The book has a foreword by Sumedha ji and end notes, end words by Madhukishwar ji. So Madhukishwar ji, many of you might already know, she's the founder of Manushi, a very renowned activist on the Hindu side, and she extremely loved the book. She loved how the detailed, multifaceted the presentations were. Similarly, Sumedha ji found the book very important to contemporary discourse. I complete with this final slide. This is the details of the book. The Sabarimala Confusion, Menstruation Across Cultures, a Historical Perspective, published in 2018, Vitasta Publishing, New Delhi. It has total of 408 pages. Around 100 pages are notes and references. They are available on Amazon, both as hardcover and Kindle ebook. I think the even in outside India, the Kindle ebook is available. and hardcover also is available. Actually, there was a North American edition also brought out by Global Collective Publishers, but I don't know the status of it. I could find it in some libraries, but their website no longer mentions the book, so I don't know whether they're still selling it or not. But the books are available in India. They can be bought from India, shipped to America, definitely. Either my publisher can do it, or you can use this other distributors to get the book. But it's definitely on this Kindle, and some other platforms such as Hindu eShop also has the book. With this, I complete my presentation. Look forward to your questions and feedback. I hope the presentation was useful to all of you. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Hi. If anyone wants to ask question, please go ahead. I see Suntar raising their hands. Please go ahead.
Hello, Nitinji. Thank you so much for your book and also for this comprehensive description of the book. Um, I will definitely get the Kindle version of the book today. The reason I'm so interested in the book is because my wife Elizabeth, she's an anthropologist of Hinduism, especially on field work on Bhairava for a long time. And myself too, I've worked on the notion of the sacred in relation to Hindu Tantricism. So this is exactly sort of subject we've been working on for several decades. So basically, everything you said is really very fascinating and valuable, and also I think valid. The only point I want to make is the central, the basic opposition that you are grappling with, the notion of impurity and the sacred. It seems to me that this opposition is still not resolved because menstrual blood on the one side is the most impure of substances, as you have shown in all, in most traditions and even among South American Indians and all of that. And on the other side, it is also the most sacred of substances. So how does one reconcile this opposition? And the way that we have tried to do this, and I think this is very important, is I think there are two different types of sacred. They're not two completely different. There are two poles to the sacred. One pole is the ascetic, pure pole, the Naishtika Brahmachari pole, which you talked about at the beginning for Sabarimala. And that is the reason why women are not allowed there, is because of the association with menstrual blood. So there, in that kind of sacrality, um, there, menstrual blood is the worst form of impurity. There are other forms of impurity too. But then in another form of sacrality, which can be associated with like the tantric goddesses like Kamakya and all of that, um, the blood itself is the menstrual blood itself becomes highly sacred. So there are actually two poles to to the sacred. And me personally, I have worked a lot on the subject of what I call transgressive sacrality. I can send you the link. So there is one form of the sacred which is pure. For example, that would be represented by Brahma or the rules of purity in Brahmanism. And then there would be another aspect of the sacred which breaks all these impurity rules, and that would be represented actually by Bhairava. And as you know, Brahma Hatya, the centrality, the central notion in Bhairava is Brahma Hatya, because he is born only to decapitate Brahma and then he has to expiate. So in a sense, Bhairava mediates between these two poles of the sacred, the pure and the impure poles. So I think that is a distinction. If it were introduced into your analysis, it would help a lot, as a mode of analysis. Thank you. I'm sorry I took so long.
Uh, Thank you, Sundarji, for your comments. Definitely, I think I mentioned today in the presentation that what appears as opposed to each other, they're actually complement to each other, and that is how I see it. They are two sides of the same coin. And you're absolutely correct that in the mainstream Vaidika practices, the menstruation is considered as ashaucha, but in the tantrika practices, the same which was ashaucha becomes shaucha, and there is a reason for it. It is the reason is the nature of the practices itself. So the most important take home point that we should keep in mind is when we use the English term impurity, it may not actually convey the essential meaning of the what the category of ashaucha is. So, in the case of Sabarimala, you mentioned, as I mentioned, the Sabarimala does not issue is not directly connected to menstruation, but only indirectly. There, the practice, the Naishtika Brahmacharya of the Devata means the what are the rules of the Naishtika Brahmacharya? The one of the rules includes, of course, not coming in contact with any sort of women of childbearing age, the fertile age. So that is the kind of that is what brahmacharya is all about. So there we have to understand the whole issue from the perspective, as you also mentioned, of the ascetic tradition. Though here it is more about the within the understanding of the Naishtika Brahmacharya particularly, but there it does not make the menstruation impure, right? There it does not make it impure. It makes here, even if you're using the term impurity, it means simply means ineligibility. So that is the point I want to stress here, that ashaucha does not mean something dirty. It may mean so in some limited sense. For example, if a woman is bleeding, of course at the physical level there is a continuous flow of blood, so that is not hygienic per se. So in that sense, you may say that there is in non it is unhygienic in some say if the blood is continuously flowing. But other than that, the ashaucha is at the level of the pranamaya kosha. It is at the level of manomaya kosha. It has no negative connotation per se in the sense of degrading women. It is more in the sense of understanding the ritual state of a person. So the crux of the matter, the way to reconcile, so to speak, between the two opposite poles, which appears to be opposite poles, is that what is ashaucha becomes shaucha. What is ashaucha in a Vaidika tradition becomes shaucha in a tantrika tradition, because both descriptions are referring to the ritual state of a person in context of a particular ritual system, right? In a tantrika or such as practice such as the bowel practices, these are also quoted in the book. The 3 days of menstruation becomes the 3 days of mahavratas, because the sexual intercourse which is prohibited in the mainstream Vaidika system, in the Dharmashastra system, that sexual union during that period becomes a mahavrata in a bowel system. Why? Because again, it comes to that aspect about the ritual system and the nature of the ritual system. So, in a tantrika ritual system or the bowel ritual system, this menstruation becomes shaucha, because in accordance to that ritual system, this practice is acceptable. This the person practicing entering that practice is eligible, so it becomes shaucha. But in the Vaidika system, this practice is not acceptable because it is not in sync with the ritualistic system which is promulgated in the Vaidika system. So we have to understand both these designations of ashaucha and shaucha with respect to a menstruating woman is equally valid in their own domains. They are valid at the same time because they are referring to the same phenomenon from the perspective of a ritual state and the eligibility. More on this is definitely in the book. Maybe not always put in this same language of the ritual state, but definitely you have lot of material on the Vaidika system. There is also section on the Tantrika system also in the book on in the chapter on menstruation.
Thank you, Nitinji. If I may just make a brief follow-up. I understand what you're saying, which is basically saying that, for example, in the Sabarimala case, the menstrual blood is no longer impure from that context. So it's just a question of brahmacharya, etc. So I think there is a nuance between what you are saying and what I'm saying, and it is an important nuance. So, like from my point of view, it is not that uh, it is not that menstrual blood and other impurities have become simply acceptable in the tantric context. They are acceptable precisely because they are prohibited. There's a notion of and prohibition and breaking the prohibition. So the notion that these are prohibited substances, in fact, they are still prohibited, and that is why they have become of great value in the tantric context. I mean, it's very interesting to read Abhinava Gupta because he's got one foot in the Vedic tradition and one foot in the tantric tradition. And just a symbolic aspect of this, you see, the Brahma Hatya that follows Bhairava everywhere after he commits his Brahma Hatya, his impurity, is always incarnated by a woman who is figured like a Kapalika woman, which follows him all the way to Benares and that is purified. So this picture of here is that menstrual blood, which is extremely impure in one context, no longer becomes pure really. It is valorized precisely because it is impure. And that is the slight difference between what you are saying and what I'm saying. And this slight difference is, I think, pretty important distinction to make. I'll send you a link to one of our papers which actually discusses this in great detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Sundarji. I think it doesn't matter to me personally. There, of course, in the book also I mentioned the references from the bowel practices, which clearly mention this menstruation period as Mahavrata, right?
Yes.
So there is clearly a mention of in a positive sense, but it doesn't matter for me, as I understand in my limited understanding. The idea of transgression is there, sure, but more than that, when you it is about the ritual system. When you see it holistically, there is a Vaidika Paddhati and there is a Tantrika Paddhati. And if you are not studying these things as a academic, but as a practitioner, as one who has a Shraddha, as one who subscribes that these practices gives real phala, then you will see that each ritual system is designed with a specific phala in mind and with a specific adhikari in the mind. So for one adhikari, the menstruation practices could be impure, so to speak. Here again, I want to stress the impurity is about ineligibility and not in any other sense. The same thing in another ritual system for the becomes makes one adhikari to that practice. So we may see it as transgression, we may see it as many other frameworks. They may have their own validity also. I am not denying it, but more than all of them, it is very important that as a practitioner you realize this panchamakara or any other practices, they are not done with a purpose to make a social statement that I am transgressing this. They are done to attain particular phala that can be attained through that ritual. So I think we will digress from the actual topic. So I would love to continue this discussion, and I had shown my email. We could definitely have a private conversation. I look forward to hear your views on this.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of time now, but if that we can take one more question if anyone wants to ask more, please go ahead. Okay, if there are no questions, then I think we should end this. Thank you, Nitin Sridharji, for taking your time on this weekend, and it was very informative talk. The recording of this video will be available on our website. Also, we'll send out emails to everyone with the YouTube link for the video. And if you have any more questions, feel free to follow up with the author. Um, yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.